teaching fellow, and I was thrown in. You get like 6 weeks of experience and then that's it. And you're tossed into this world that's already kind of isolated as a classroom teacher, where you're separated from the other teachers, and then there's all of these crazy top-down mandates that are pushed on you as a teacher that are really overwhelming. I'm also a special education teacher, and so the intensity of expectations put on us for reaching certain products, right, or levels of student achievement with our students, it's all very daunting. There's a lot of banter, and you're inundated, you're indoctrinated in what feels like almost a cultish kind of world as a teaching fellow. And so I was pushed into this and like really overwhelmed as a new teacher, and I discovered NYCoRE in my very first year, and it totally saved me as a teacher, because it was this group of radical educators that were talking about all of these issues of racism and of poverty and the injustices as they actually manifest in the everyday lives of students and teachers and families in New York City, with this understanding of a larger institutional projects, right? These series of projects that are underway. And so NYCoRE has been a community that I have been involved in intensely since I discovered it, and it, I think, in part offers teachers this incredible alternative way of looking at everything that we encounter.
One of the struggles I think that we've been trying to navigate throughout the years is the not wanting to be single issue and thinking about how different forms of injustice occur within the field of education. And so we started with military work and then quickly moved to high stakes testing, and since then have tried to develop a more work group structure where different members are involved in different aspects of the work. So really kind of thinking about school closures, the high stakes testing, the military recruitment, as well as restorative justice, privatization, and all of those elements of the work. And so the last thing that I just wanted to say with regards to it is we've also been really focused on developing an analysis of the root causes of what's happening in education reform. And so we've spent a lot of years really thinking about the political economy and thinking about those larger social structural things, and what's been described as this neoliberal turn in education reform with regards to privatization and a corporate model for education reform. And so we talked about that as the Hydra, right? And so really thinking about how there are multiple projects within education that operate together. To build off of that, and having spent many years thinking about the Hydra, is the question of race. And so really thinking about what we've come to talk about as racial capitalism, right? How do the racial and race and racism is always already interlinked with capital, and so how do we think about that with education reform? And so that's what we really tried to focus our analysis on and try to engage our members around.
I'd just like to say that I don't realize how time flies, but what's very, very important is that NYCoRE has been around 10 years. Progressive organizations in the 21st century, to sustain themselves for a decade, is a phenomenon inside the United States, and particularly in New York City. So they are to be commended for hanging in there for that length of time. To make a long story short, as you may know, June 2015, mayoral control sunsets, and what that means is that the legislative body in Albany will vote to continue for a number of X years further of the mayoral control quote-unquote experiment, or will replace that with something else. All of the struggles that NYCoRE had mentioned and that they're involved in and that we're involved in, all of those struggles center around a positive result out of those struggles center around whether or not in 2015 mayoral control will continue. If this was White Plains, this never would have happened. If this was Deer Park, this would never have happened. But because this is a city primarily made up of people of color, working class, the state let me rephrase that. The politicians, both state and the city council, were able to wrench what semblance of power we had in community control. In decentralization bill in 1969, wrench that out of the hands of those folk and put it in the hands of the mayor. And it happened in a very conscious way. This was the first multi-billionaire mayor. That is to say, I'll rephrase it, this was the first mayor who had the direct link to other members of the ruling class. He legally had to keep the Board of Education because that's how the money comes to the city. But he also created the Department of Education, and inside of that, semi-governmental organizations. Never in the past, it was never semi-governmental organizations. Billions of dollars go to these semi-governmental structures. Therefore, billions of dollars of our tax dollars have no oversight by the comptroller. The comptroller, because it's a semi-governmental organization. So therefore, there were a number of things that he was able to do immediately. One was to give his friend in real estate 110 Livingston Street, the former headquarters, iconic headquarters of the Board of Ed. And the second was to create these unbelievably large no-bid contracts for another set of friends. So the privatization process accelerated from 2002 onward. And Teach for America was one of those aspects that you had mentioned. And that what we know, a little bit of statistics on that, more than 60% of the new teachers who come into New York City schools come from Teach for America in 2012, 2013. The Coalition for Public Education is, like I said, one of those historical threads that we came out of various attempts to deal with the issue of mayoral control and try to inform parents and educators about the horrors of mayoral control. And eventually we wound up as a coalition looking at what we should be fighting for, not just what we should be fighting against. It has to be a human rights-based public school system. A public school system that says at its outset that education is a human right. It is more than just a civil right. Remember now, mayoral control could not have happened if city council did not give up its ability for what we call home rule, and also for the state legislative body to say, eventually say, yes, you ought to take over and do this.
So, do we have any hope for any of the current candidates?
My sense is that not really, but if John Liu became mayor, there would be, I think we could get some little bit of pieces of non-mayoral control things going in the city.
I was at a mayoral candidate forum recently, and the question came up. Diane Ravitch was the moderator, and she asked all of them how they would feel about mayoral control of the schools once they took office. And I think each of them said something to the effect of, well, I'm not sure. Well, that's not true. One of them, John Liu, the guy who used to be the president of the DOE, like back in the day, or the Board of Ed.
Oh, yeah. Thompson.
Bill Thompson. Bill Thompson said, well, he was the only one who said, well, I don't know. He was like, I don't think it's entirely necessary for there to be this like dictatorial control of our school system, but in the end, I really would want to fix things, so yeah, I'd probably keep mayoral control. And that's what they all said, was I want to fix things, so I'm going to keep mayoral control. And I feel like that's been, right, Bloomberg came in touting himself as the education mayor, right, and he was he was like, I'm gonna fix this school system. But it's turned into his authoritarian control of our schools, and he has created the panel for educational policy, which is his rubber stamp, that convenes to vote, but that doesn't actually happen because they're all mayorally appointed folks, or the majority of them are,
Right.
yeah. And so no matter how many parents and teachers and students head out there at the PEP meetings to say, stop closing our schools, they still continue to shut them down.
I think we're going to bring the sort of formal segment of this to an end now, but hopefully these folks will stick around afterwards for a couple of minutes and you can talk a little bit. I'd like you all to join me in giving a round of applause, thanking Margrit.